Welcome back to me documenting the process of building businesses around my ADHD brain. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jack Taylor. I am the host of the ADHD Entrepreneur podcast and the founder of The Hunter Brain, which is a coaching and consultancy practice for ADHD founders, helping them to live and build in alignment with their ADHD type brain, rather than fighting it all the time, which is the experience for many of us. Now, what I'm going to be doing in these types of episodes is I'm going to be running you through everything I learned from my businesses, my clients' businesses, and the plethora of podcast guests I'm very fortunate to be speaking to on a weekly basis. We're going to be covering two main points in these episodes. It's going to be some form of insight and strategy that I think will be valuable to you. And then I'll be answering a question that somebody has submitted or that I've recently been asked. The insight and strategy that I'm going to be giving you is in alignment to the goals that I have and the criteria that I'm building my business around. Not only am I building my business around my brain, but I recognize that for me, my brain needs these 5 Fs, which is flow. I need to be in a constant state of flow rather than my weeks feeling like force. I want to be focused and I want to create systems to facilitate focus. I want it to be fun. Business is hard as it is, right? And it is literally a lifestyle commitment that you are getting into. So I'd at least rather it be fun. It needs to be built around me creating freedom, and I want to be finishing every week feeling fulfilled. So those are the criteria that we're working towards here. So let's get into today's insight. You cannot prioritize what you cannot see. Now, if you have listened to any of my stuff in the past, you will know that I am a huge advocate of externalizing your brain. I do everything I can to try and work problems outside of my brain. The example that I always give to my clients is that if I was to give you a complex maths problem that you needed to solve, but you weren't allowed to use a calculator, you would likely go and grab a pen and paper. Well, why is that? That is because it is easier for you to solve a problem outside of your head because you can create distance from the problem and you can have an element of objectivity towards it. You can solve it in parts. You can work with the brackets first and then deal with whatever's outside of the brackets. You have a sequence of which that you can solve the problem. And that is so much easier for you to do if it is outside of your head and it is on a piece of paper. Now, our business is going to be complex, like a maths equation, yet we try to solve all of the problems and keep everything inside of our own head. And that is why so many of us that have an ADHD or a hunter brain, as we call it, find ourselves becoming so overwhelmed, so distracted, and ultimately not living up to the potential that we have, not building the businesses that we are truly capable of doing. And it's not because we do not have the potential, it's because we cannot actualize it. And that's one of the biggest reasons that I see as to why that's the case. Because if everything ultimately lives in your head, a huge opportunity and a tiny one are going to take up the same amount of space, the same amount of cognitive space and bandwidth. And that's then really difficult for us to be able to discern which one we should be or should not be putting our energy and our attention into. And I want to drive this story home with a story of Cam. So Cam is one of my clients, and we had a fantastic call yesterday that I want to run you through. So Cam runs a electrical company, right? And one of the main products that they have, the main services that they have, their highest ticket service is solar. He and his team are doing incredibly well. They have got great profit margins, and we are likely going to be taking them to 7 figures this year. And I think they were doing around 300,000 there or thereabouts last year. So a huge amount of growth that we've been able to obtain this year, which is phenomenal. Now, we got on a call yesterday and he wanted to start talking about EV chargers, right? So I'm not going to get too techie around like what all of this is because I'll give you as much context as I think is actually relevant to the story that I'm going to tell you, right? But he wanted to come on and start talking about EV chargers. And he was saying to me that, right, he tested a few days of doing EV chargers. I think it was around 3 days. And he'd managed to bag himself about £1,500. And he was buzzing. He was like, fucking sweet. I've just made 1,500 quid for like 3 days worth of work. Now, my response to this was probably not what he was expecting because he was buzzing. And to the point where he was actually, which is why he's raising it with me, wanting to have a discussion around whether we should add this as a second service line and really prioritize this in his business and start like creating the adequate systems and infrastructure to do so and to deliver this. And my response wasn't as excited as Cam's. And rather than just saying it straight and bursting his bubble, I wanted to take him through this like mental model that I'm going to walk you through now to really help him to, one, understand why I actually wasn't as excited as he was, and two, help him to avoid falling into the really common pattern that I see so many of the ADHD entrepreneurs that I work with fall into, which is getting distracted by things that are not the number one priority right now, and they're ultimately not the golden goose. So the first thing we did with Cam was get everything that was inside of his head and we got it down onto my iPad. We took all of the ways that him and his business could make money and we put them into little boxes. And this is ultimately how it looked when we got it onto paper. I basically explained to Cam that this is what was going on for him. He was this little guy here with this really wide field of view, and every single possibility and let's call it opportunity in his business was a box that was the same size, and they were all scattered across this field of view that he had, which made it really difficult for him to be able to discern how any of them were any different, any of them were more valuable. Because each of these boxes were the same size, there was nothing to differentiate themselves between them, right? And that is why ultimately it became clear very quickly that Cam was focusing on the wrong things inside of his business. Because yes, I totally understand that earning £1,500 over a 3-day period, it's really easy for us to be able to justify why we should be spending time on that, especially if it's quick and fast money. But Cam had fallen for the trap that so many of us do, which is that because our brains have a tough time in being able to prioritize and order the work in which that we're meant to be doing inside of our business, it just looked like this. Everything was just spread out thin in front of us, and every option was taking up the same amount of mental space. It was really difficult for us to have a hierarchy of what we should be approaching in our business. And this picture tells us nothing about what anything is worth. So we do what Cam did, and we reach for whatever is nearest, whatever is newest, whatever is easiest, or whatever is most interesting to us. Now, that EV work that he wanted to discuss when he hopped on the call ticked all of those boxes, right? So because of that, we can assume that this little box here that's closest to Cam with the money sign within it, even though it may not actually be the best time spent inside of his business, giving him the most amount of value to the business, because it was the closest and we don't have a way to be able to differentiate what we should or should not be working with, that was what he was thinking about spending his time on. So on the call, we only did one thing. I wanted him to tell me the different areas of his business and how he could spend his time and the services that they could offer. But instead of making all the boxes the same size, we drew the box size that was relative to the amount of value that it would provide to the business. And in doing so, this is then how it started to look. We were able to recognize that there was one big box that stood out amongst all of the other boxes. And that was the one service that he had in solar, right? So this box here was his solar product, his solar service. And then we were able to identify that this little box up here was the EV thing that he was considering. Because a full day of EV work, we calculated, made him a couple of £100. Whereas if he spent 3 days on the solar business, we calculated what the knock-on effect of that would be in his business, and it would equate to roughly around £16,000 worth of extra profit every month. It just wasn't as obvious to him at the time. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, once we laid all of this out to him, his immediate response was, Jack, what the fuck am I doing looking at EV? Now, nothing in his business had changed. We had not added anything to it for him to be able to unlock the £16,000 worth of profit and potential every month. We'd actually taken things away. We'd taken away the possibility of him spending time on collecting a few pennies when we could actually be adding multiple zeros to his profit each year. But the reason why he couldn't see this on his own is the same reason why so many other ADHD entrepreneurs are stuck. And it usually comes down to 3 main things. If you have an ADHD brain or one that is higher up on the ADHD spectrum like myself, what we do, and one of the challenges we face, is that we make more boxes than the average person. And this is because of our ability to be able to divergently think. We spend more time in our default mode network, which means that our creativity is typically a lot higher, which is why we're usually overflowing with ideas. And these ideas can create more boxes, which makes it even more difficult for us to be able to figure out what we need to be focusing on. And that is because our field of view is more crowded and wider than most people's. We have more mental options, which creates more mental noise, meaning we have more things to try and organize in our mind to get to a place where we have a clear hierarchy of what we should or should not be working on inside of our business. The priority order of which generates the most amount of money and value to the business. Challenge number 2 that we face is that we keep the majority of this in our head. And this touches on something I spoke about in the last episode with the target protocol, is that this is the mental RAM that we continuously drain. And the more we try and keep inside of our brains, and the more we try and hold in there, the more it is draining the capacity that we need to be able to make high quality decisions in our business. And the success of your business is likely determined by the quality of those decisions. And the irony is, the fuller your head is, the worse your judgment gets, which is exactly why most of you that are listening to this need to externalize your brain. Because if we don't, we're going to be perpetually trying to mentally organize like thousands of different opportunities and ideas that we have. And that alone, before we've even started anything, just the process of trying to organize everything is fatiguing. And then challenge number 3 is that our heads will hold one at a time, meaning that because we hold everything inside of our heads can only possibly hold like one idea or one project at a time. And whichever project you are holding at any one given time feels the biggest, it feels the most important, and it feels like it has the most amount of weight attached to it. Not because it is, but it's because the one that you're bringing attention to right now. So for example, if I started focusing on this box here, I would not be able to see the rest. So this would then start to feel like my only option. It would feel like the most valuable part of my business. And it's ultimately not. It's just because it's where I'm putting my attention. And because I have almost discounted the rest of these, because my brain can only focus on one thing at a time, like this then seems like my only option. But when we get everything outside of our head and we're able to look at all of the components of our business, we're then able to accurately assess like which parts of the business drive the most amount of kind of enterprise value. We're then able to create a sequence and an order of priority. So instead of only prioritizing whatever we are focusing on, we're able to prioritize what actually matters. Now guys, I know this was a little bit of a techie one today. And if you're listening on the podcast, I'd highly recommend you just jumping over to YouTube, just to have a look at the visuals that I've mapped out for today, because it will make what I'm trying to explain to you significantly easier. And I was wondering whether I should go through this or I should not, because a large portion of this is predicated, obviously, on the visuals doing a lot of the work. However, it was too important for me to not share, because literally this conversation that I had with Cam last night was able to unlock £16,000 worth of profit from his business every single month by us being able to discern where his energy should be going inside of his business. And instead of him focusing on almost like what would seem the low-hanging fruit with the EV, it was like us stepping over pounds to pick up pennies. And in 60 minutes of us having this conversation and me taking him through this, he was able to take parts of his business and rank them in order of value. It just became a no-brainer. It became no decision that needed to be made. It was just like, why am I spending time even thinking about the EV when I can make at least 5 times a day by just focusing on the other thing? And it just becomes obvious when we lay it out objectively, but this is the point. It's that so many of us who have an ADHD type brain are not doing this. We're trying to work everything out inside of our brains, and our brains move so fast and they get so crowded that it feels like an impossible task, and it needs someone, usually external to you, to be able to almost like grab you on the shoulders and go, bro, what are you doing? This doesn't make sense. And there's this great saying that I've heard a few times, which is that your mouth is situated just a couple of centimeters beneath your nose, yet it takes someone else to tell you that your breath smells like shit. Showcasing that it's so hard for us to be able to see our own problems, and it often just needs someone else to point it out for us. And like I say, for Cam, this just took 60 minutes of us hopping on a call together, mapping out his business onto a straight line, and then being able to have a look at what is the most valuable thing to him. And it became clear it was the solar and it was not the EV. And I'm sure Cam won't mind me saying that the EV is pretty much getting dropped now so that we can focus on the highest leverage activities in his business. Now let's move on to the question that I'm going to be answering this week. Jack, I know exactly what to do and I still don't do it. Why? Now, there's a number of reasons as to why this could be the case. But typically, like the thing that I want to address here is that they're two separate things and we often get them conflated. Knowing what to do means whether we do or do not have a knowledge/information problem. So if you do not know what to do, it's typically a knowledge gap, and you need to go and plug that gap. Knowing what to do and then not yet doing it means that you don't have a knowledge issue, you have an execution issue. Now, the reason why I think it's so important for me to say that and for you guys to be able to see that they are two separate parts of maybe what seems like the same equation is because when someone is in a place like this, knowing what to do but still not doing it, they try and solve an execution problem with more knowledge. And I know this because I did it for fucking years. I knew exactly what to do. I had a library's worth of knowledge in my mind and I still was not doing it. And I thought that the solution was to listen to more podcasts, to read more books, to hire more mentors that were teaching me more stuff about tactics and strategies. And that wasn't it, because that was solving and optimizing for as if I had a knowledge problem and I did not. So now we've got that out of the way. Let me answer the question, because it could be a number of different things. So I'll kind of list them out so you can actually see why someone who knows what to do may still not be doing it. So the first reason can be because of task paralysis, which means that we have too many choices to focus on. Thus, our brain just freezes. So this kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier, where to get our brain into gear, we often need to actually just subtract everything that is not the thing we should be doing, because our brains are so sensitive to dopamine and so sensitive towards things that could be even just minutely interesting, or at least it has to be more interesting than the thing that maybe you should be doing. It will just get drawn towards those. So we need to get rid of them. Another reason why typically ADHD entrepreneurs struggle with not doing things that they know they should be doing or are struggling to get started is because it seems low interest. Boring tasks, if that's what it is, and it could just be perceived boring, they feel painful to our brains. So what we can do is we can actually try and redesign the task itself so that it has more stimulation in and around it. So let me give you an example. Like, transparently, one of the biggest challenges inside of my business that I faced for such a long period of time was answering messages. And this is answering messages to anybody, answering messages to clients, answering messages to prospects in like my DMs, things like that. And even like in my personal life, answering messages to like my mum on time, things like that. It would take me days previously when I didn't have this dialed in. But obviously that's unacceptable. I can't let my clients be waiting days and days from a response from me. And likewise, it's not good for business if I have someone in my DMs who's wanting to work with me and I'm leaving them on red for a number of days. So I can't just accept the fact that I struggle with that and then just be done with it. I need to solve for it. But it feels like sandpaper on my brain. So I redesigned the task. I've done a couple of things to do so. I have started to dictate instead of type. So that for me is a game changer. I find it significantly easier for me to be able to speak rather than like type with my thumbs. And even that, just reducing the friction of having to do that, has made it easier for my brain to engage with a task. So that's one way in which I've redesigned it. I now no longer ever type. I always speak. Number two is I don't do those tasks in this office. If I am doing what would seem as a low stimulation task or a repetitive task, I go and put myself into an environment where there is more stimulation. So I answer my messages, my clients will know this, when I'm out on a walk with a dog or I'm at the gym on the treadmill. I'm in transit. So my body has to be moving because that creates enough stimulation for my mind then to be concentrating on the work at hand. So they're just like two things that I can give you straight away off the bat that I see probably are the two most common reasons as to why people, let's say with ADHD brains, struggle to get things done that they know they should be doing. They know what to do and they're struggling to consistently execute on it. And it's usually because of those two things. Like, starting is usually the hardest part. Once we get over the hurdle of starting, like continuing the task is usually easier. And it's like we then can sometimes flick into a hyper-focused state, which if we learn how to wield can be really a advantage for us. It's just getting into that state intentionally and on demand, which can be a challenge. So yeah, hopefully you guys have found that helpful and interesting today. And as always, if you want to get your questions answered, if you are watching this on YouTube, just comment your question below this video. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, just DM me on Instagram your question and I'll get it aired next time. The link for all of my socials is underneath this episode. I'll catch you on the next one.